Welcome back. So at the end of the last video, I set you a challenge to try and identify some of the inputs we're going to use on our group node and also set up the outputs on our group node. So let's do that just now. First of all, let's go over to the inputs, and to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to use Shift, right click and just drag a redirect point in there for all of these multiple outputs that we have from that output. This is going to be our first group input, and we'll deal with the rest once we have the node set up. And we have these 4 nodes, each of them outputting either the map inverted, the mask, and the mask inverted. So those are all the nodes we need in our group. So let's grab all of these, hit Ctrl G, and turn those into a group node. Now let's do the outputs first, because we are only going to have these 4. We won't need any more in the entire group. So let's just grab this top one, put it in the top slot. We'll grab the inverse of that. Then we'll grab the 2 masks. Now we can open up the side tab here, go to group, and we can just rename these. So this will be Scratchy's map. This will be Scratchy's map inverted. This will be the Scratchy's mask. And this will be the Scratchy's mask inverted. Now finally, we just have to turn these from color to float. And that is our outputs finished. We don't need any more outputs on this entire node. So let's deal with our inputs. So at the moment we have input so far. This is going to be our vector. Next we need a scale. So in order to do a scale here, we're going to use a converter vector math node. So we can plug this into our original vector, and we can use scale in here, and this is going to give us a scale value which we can use to increase or decrease the scale of our entire texture. So everything where we have this vector going into it, all our noise maps essentially are now controlled by this one scale. And we can plug this in here, and that's simply going to be our scale. The next thing we want to do is we want to adjust these scratches a little bit so we can get some nice curved scratches. Now at the moment, I think we are looking at our greater than, and I don't know about you, but on my screen I can barely see any white at all. In fact, I think we're looking through our color ramp. Let's just have a look and just check that. Yeah, we'll look at it through this input, so things are a little bit clearer. But again, it's still pretty hard to see some of these scratches. Now, if you remember in the last video, we went through and we adjusted some of these factors. And by adjusting some of these factors, we were able to thicken some of these scratches up a little bit. So I'm just going to do that now and just go through and just slightly adjust some of these factors. Now, there's nothing that says you can't go in and plug all these factors into your group input so you have control over the thickness and the length of all these scratches later on. But to be quite honest, I think it might be overkill to have, let's see, 1, 2, 8 different controls for the width of scratches. And quite honestly, it's probably going to be a little bit tricky to figure out a system to have one slider to control the entire thing. So again, I'm just going to go down to this bottom section and just adjust these slightly as well. I'm just trying to bring up the width of some of these scratches just so that we can see them a little bit clearer on our map. These scratches are quite subtle, and we don't want to go too crazy with them. In fact, if we look at our map from here, we are starting to see some of those patches coming in that we don't want. So we do have to be pretty subtle with this. And remember, these values have to be really close together. It's taking these values too far apart that creates this effect. Now in this case, we can see that this one is really distorted. So that might actually be down to this noise texture. So if we just take the detail on this down a little bit and take the roughness down a little bit, you can see that now that scratch, instead of being a bit of a mess, becomes more like a scratch. And then we can go back and we can start looking at adjusting our vector a little bit, maybe making that a little bit thinner, maybe adjusting this one a little bit too. And I quite like that kind of hook end that's on that. And as long as we don't have any other issues around our mesh, which I don't see any issues really, I think I'm happy with that as our final scratch map. Now, One thing I do want to do is, if we have quite a few scratches on the surface, we don't want them all to be straight. We maybe want some curves in there. So let's just add in a mix color node. We'll also add in a noise texture, which we'll plug into our vector. And we'll plug this factor into slot B. And now you can see automatically we're starting to get some nice curved scratches. This factor is going to be our control for that. Now you can see if we put this way, way up, it's far too much distortion. This is it with 0 power. If we put it up just a little bit, I would say once it gets to about 0.25, our scratches start becoming a little bit undesirable. I think something like this is about as extreme as you want to go. If we put that up to like 0.3, that's when we start getting circles and things. So I think our maximum for that is probably going to be about 0.25. So we'll take this, and this is going to be our scratch curve. Now, if we want, we could also take this scale, the detail, and the roughness. You can see if we increase the detail there, we get more kind of wiggles on our scratches. It does tend to make them turn into circles a little bit quicker. Same with roughness as well. Starts to turn these into circles. However, the scale might be one that we might want to adjust a little bit, because if we have a lower scale, we could actually probably stand to put this factor up a little bit more. However, I think a scale of about 2.5 or so gives us the odd occasional nice little curve. So I think I'm happy with that. Again, you could plug these scale, detail, roughness in here, but I don't think it's really necessary. Now, as far as all that goes, I don't think there's anything else that we need to change in there. I think everything else is good to go. So let's tab out, have a look at our map. And we have 3 very simple settings: vector, scale, and scratch curve. Let's take that scratch curve down. Let's put it all the way up. So we do need to set up our default there. That's one thing we forgot to do. Scratch curve, maximum 0.25. We'll set the default of that to 0 as well. The scale here, the scale is fine. We don't have to worry about that. Let's just tab out. Scratch curve goes back down to 0. And the most we can increase that is 0.25. And you can see if we get to a certain point in that, we can get much more curved scratches without even going up to the maximum. In fact, that tends to straighten out a little bit or even disappear once we get to a certain amount. And you have to also remember that we are distorting not only the scratches, but because this is going in after our scale and before all these slots, it's also distorting these noise textures that are then distorting the vectors once again before they go into our Voronoi texture. So we do have to be very careful with the factor in here because it affects the entire map. And we really don't want to break anything. Okay, so it's challenge time, and your challenge in this video is pretty simple. All you have to do is name the node group within the node, and within the name and label fields within the node tab. Mark the node group as an asset. And finally save your file within the asset browser folder. So pause the video, have a go at that, and join me in a moment and I'll show you how I would do it. So let's do the last little bit of cleanup we need. We need to name this. So we'll name that scratches generator, and I'll plug this into the name and the label as well. The only other thing we need to do now is go into Blender File, go into our node group, and we're going to mark this as an asset. And then we'll just save this file within our asset browser folder where we're keeping all these different node generators. And there we go, we have our node. In the next video, we're going to begin working on an Edgeware shader node. I'll see you then.